Hey, Book Dragons, I'm so glad you've joined me today. We're going to be talking about my biggest disappointments of 2024. I try not to get negative on my channel. I kind of went back and forth. Do I want to make this video? I've seen a lot of people making the video. I finally settled on yes. And the reason I did is because I think it's important to talk about my hits as well as my misses without getting too negative, and I think I can do that. So, but that being said, let's get right to this list. It is a short one, but I have a few things that I want to say about these books that I'm going to talk about. Okay, the first one on this list is The Crystal Cave by Mary Stewart. I have a lot of history with this series. You guys have probably heard me talk about how I used to borrow books from my grandmother when I was younger. And, when I was around preteen, teenage, I was a voracious reader. I borrowed a lot of books from her. And one of those was the Arthur series, or rather, I should say the Merlin series by Mary Stewart. And it's been hailed as one of the best Arthurian retellings, even though it's technically about Merlin, but it has Arthur in it to a small extent. And I remember just absolutely loving this series growing up. I remembered it fondly, and it was one of those series that I was itching to reread as an adult. And so I finally did that this year. I read The Crystal Cave, and I did a buddy read with Alyssa over at Into the Heart Wild for this book. I was just absolutely devastated at how poor a reading experience it was for me. I wasn't sure what happened. I was like, is this the same book I read? And I know for sure it is. I know for sure it's the same book, but I almost wonder if it just magically changed over time. I know it didn't, but part of me's like, oh, this is just not at all what I remember it being. And granted, I didn't remember really anything about the book other than I really enjoyed it back then. And I think part of it is that I've grown as a reader and I'm more in touch with what I expect from a story, and this just wasn't it. I was so disappointed. And Alyssa felt the same way, and she and I have gone back and forth on whether we even continue the series, and I'm kind of leaning toward no at this point. I'm thinking, oh, yeah, I don't think I want to bother. And it's really unfortunate because it doesn't ruin my childhood memory, but it sours it a little. The Crystal Cave was a really big disappointment for me in 2024. It's okay because there's plenty of Arthur retellings out there, and I'm sure I can find others that I really love. I love The Warlord Chronicles by Bernard Cornwell, so that's a big win in that category for me. So yeah, it's time to move on. The next one on my list is American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. And this was a big disappointment for me for a couple of reasons. One of which is that it was a gift from my son. And I can't remember if it was for Father's Day or Christmas, but it was, or maybe my birthday, but it was one of those that my son had got that book for me. And I drew it out of my Stein of Power, and I was really excited to read it and see what it was like. Oof. I hated that book, guys. I'm surprised I kept reading it. I did finish the book, and oh, it was just a disaster. So yeah, I was really disappointed. Not only because it was a gift, but because it's a very well-loved book in a lot of circles. And I know that it's probably a story from an unreliable narrator. I get that. We're getting the experience of a man who's quite delusional. But it was just, oh, I was so uncomfortable the whole time. And that disappointed me because I wasted so much time reading it. But everybody's different. A lot of people love that book. It's a great experience for them. And I'm so glad about that. It's become a bestseller for a reason. it just wasn't for me. So the next one on this list, I think, might be the biggest disappointment on this list. The one after it is close in the running, but this one is 2 books actually. Children of Dune, and I don't have the physical copy of God Emperor of Dune, so I'm just going to put that right here. But yeah, this was a disappointment for me. It ended up being an okay read by the end, but it wasn't anything that I feel like I would reread. It wasn't a great story for me. It dragged in so many places, and it just seemed a far cry from the first 2 books in the Dune saga. And then God Emperor of Dune, I DNF'd. I DNF'd that book, and I'm not going back. I'm not continuing the series. And that, I think, is the biggest thing that disappoints me, is I wanted so much to love the entire Dune series by Frank Herbert, and it just bombed for me. The first book will always be one of my favorite sci-fi books of all time. Dune Messiah was excellent as well, but yeah, those other 2 books were just a paltry comparison to the first 2 books. And I really wanted to love them, and I didn't, and that hurts. That really hurts, because I love the first 2 books so much. A lot of people love them, and a lot of people say that the first 4 books are fantastic. I didn't get the hype for Children of Dune and God Emperor, but that's okay. Like I've said for the previous entries on this list, to each their own. Everybody feels differently towards books that they read, and I love that. I really hope that a lot more people read these books and love them. They deserve to be loved. Those 2 books just didn't work for me, and that's a bummer. And then the last one on this list, guys, is Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. And yeah, you're probably going, what? Chaz? And if you've seen my review for Wind and Truth, it's a spoiler-free review, you probably know that I did not jive well with that book. It was not bad by any means. It was still a good read. I just wish it had been better. There was a lot of hype surrounding the book. It ends the first arc of the Stormlight Archive, so a lot of people were really excited to see where the book went and see how he ends that first arc, and it was just so heavily promoted and push, and you want to get this on day one. Fanboys of Brandon Sanderson all across the world are just itching to get their hands on this copy, and I am a fan of Brandon Sanderson. He's not my favorite author. I really, really like his writing, and this just did not feel like it fit within the Stormlight Archive. It felt like a very different book. And in a way it was. He was trying to do a lot of fresh things in the book, and maybe that is what knocked it down. I don't know. I just did not feel the same about that book as I did for the other books in the series. It was way too long, it dragged way too much in parts, and I wanted to love it, but I didn't totally. There were definitely parts of it I liked. I quite enjoyed a lot of the book, but other parts I was just like, oh my goodness, what is this? I think my disappointment about the Dune books is probably higher than my disappointment for Wind and Truth, but it's close, guys. It's not to the point where I would DNF the Stormlight Archive and not ever read another book in the Stormlight Archive like I'm planning to for Dune. It was still a big disappointment. So yeah, that's what I've got for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got something out of it. I hope I didn't come across as too negative. I don't ever want to do that. Even for Wind and Truth, a lot of people love that book, and I'm happy they do. I'm happy it worked so well for them. I never want to downplay someone else's favorite book. So these were just my experiences, my opinions, and I hope that came through. So let me know in the comments below what some of your biggest disappointments of 2024 are. Were some of these books I listed on that list? Let me know that as well. And until next time, guys, make sure you read more books. I'll talk with you soon. And I'd like to shout out my patrons. I really appreciate all you do to support my channel. It means the world to me.